Welcome in today. We're taking a closer look at a Washington quarter that may have more going on beneath its ordinary appearance than most collectors realize. Step 1. A quarter carrying two dates, 2 centuries apart, seems ordinary at first glance. But the 1776-1976 Washington Bicentennial Quarter represents one of the most unusual chapters in modern American coinage. It was created for a national celebration, unlike anything the United States Mint had attempted in generations, and millions of these coins were saved specifically because Americans recognized their historical significance the moment they appeared. Yet the fascinating part is that enormous production numbers did not prevent certain examples from becoming genuinely desirable. As we examine this coin more closely, the difference between an everyday circulated specimen and a truly exceptional collector piece becomes much clearer. Later, we will look at what authenticated examples have actually brought at auction, and more importantly, why professional graders and collectors can place dramatically different values on coins that appear nearly identical to the untrained eye. The story begins with the approaching 200th anniversary of American independence. Congress authorized special circulating designs for the quarter, half dollar and dollar, and the Mint ultimately introduced the new bicentennial reverses in 1975 and 1976. That detail creates one of the first surprises surrounding this quarter. There is no conventional 1975 dated Washington quarter. The coins struck during both years carried the combined inscription 1776-1976, allowing the Mint to honor the bicentennial throughout the production period without creating separate 1975 and 1976 versions. The dual date was therefore more than decorative typography. It was a deliberate historical statement connecting the founding era with modern America. The Mint expected enormous public demand, and quarter production increased substantially as the celebration approached. More than 1.6 billion circulating bicentennial quarters were ultimately produced in Philadelphia and Denver, making the ordinary examples plentiful rather than inherently rare. Look at the obverse, and the coin immediately connects with the long-running Washington quarter design. George Washington faces left, based on the famous bust by French sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon, with Liberty above his portrait and In God We Trust positioned to the left. Beneath Washington is the unmistakable 1776-1976 dual date. John Flanagan's Washington portrait had already been a familiar part of American pocket change since 1932, when the design was introduced to commemorate Washington's 200th birthday. For the bicentennial issue, however, the familiar portrait became the anchor of a completely different commemorative composition. Flip the coin over and the transformation is immediate. Instead of the traditional eagle, the reverse presents a colonial drummer facing left beside a victory torch surrounded by 13 stars, symbolizing the original 13 colonies. The reverse was designed by Jack L.R., whose proposal won the national competition for the quarter's bicentennial design. Underneath that patriotic artwork is another important distinction. Not every 1776-1976 quarter is made from the same metal. The Philadelphia and Denver circulation issues were copper-nickel-clad coins, consisting of outer layers containing copper and nickel bonded to a pure copper center. Standard clad examples weigh about 5.67 grams and measure 24.3 millimeters across, with a reeded edge. San Francisco also produced copper-nickel-clad proof quarters for collectors, but it additionally struck special 40% silver-clad versions. Those silver issues were sold as collector products rather than released as ordinary pocket change. Their composition makes them especially interesting, because the quarter represents the only post-1964 Washington quarter issue struck in a 40% silver format. The silver-clad pieces have a different weight and metallic appearance, but visual inspection alone is not always enough to determine authenticity or composition. A careful collector should consider weight, dimensions, surface characteristics, And for valuable examples, professional testing rather than relying on color or a simple magnet test. The mint mark is another clue that can completely change the identity of the coin. Philadelphia examples carry no mint mark, while Denver coins have a small d and San Francisco collector issues carry an S. Philadelphia produced 809,780,4016 regular clad bicentennial quarters, while Denver struck an even larger 860,118,839. San Francisco produced 7,059,099 copper-nickel-clad proofs, along with approximately 11,040% silver uncirculated quarters and 4 million silver proofs. Those numbers explain why a typical Philadelphia or Denver example found in circulation is not automatically rare simply because it is nearly 50 years old. In fact, the enormous number saved by the public means that ordinary circulated coins remain abundant. Rarity begins to become meaningful when another factor enters the equation: exceptional preservation, a scarce variety, an unusual mint error, or a certified coin that reaches an unusually high grade. That distinction becomes critical when discussing collector value. A worn copper-nickel bicentennial quarter generally has little premium above its face value, and even many attractive uncirculated examples remain relatively affordable because so many were preserved. But the upper end of the market tells a very different story. A 1776 1976D clad quarter certified in MS-68, for example, has brought $6,462 in an NGC-certified auction result, demonstrating how dramatically condition can outweigh the coin's huge mintage. PCGS auction records also show a $2,520 result for a Philadelphia clad example, and an $8,400 record for a Denver clad example. These are not representative prices for ordinary bicentennial quarters. They are evidence of what collectors may pay when a coin reaches an exceptional certified grade and occupies a desirable position in the population. The silver issues reveal an even more dramatic side of the series. San Francisco's 40% silver bicentennial quarter was distributed through special collector sets, and millions were produced, so simply discovering an S-marked silver coin does not automatically make it extraordinarily rare. Nevertheless, condition becomes increasingly important at the highest levels. Auction records tracked by PCGS show a 1976 S silver quarter reaching $19,200, while a Great Collections record shows a 1976 S silver example graded PCGS MS-69 selling for $7,368.75. These extraordinary results should be understood correctly. They do not mean that every silver bicentennial quarter is worth thousands of dollars. They demonstrate the enormous premium that can arise when certified quality, eye appeal, population rarity, and collector demand intersect. Even within the same silver issue, a heavily handled coin and a nearly flawless certified specimen can occupy completely different markets. Grading is therefore one of the most important pieces of the value puzzle. A coin graded AU has experienced circulation, but retains substantial detail, while an MS coin is an uncirculated business strike whose surfaces have not received the normal wear associated with circulation. Within mint state, every single point can become increasingly difficult to achieve. MS-65 may look exceptionally attractive to a casual observer, but MS-67 or MS-68 requires much stronger surfaces, better strike quality, fewer distractions, and greater overall eye appeal. On the bicentennial quarter, collectors pay particular attention to the drummer's details: the torch, the stars, Washington's portrait, the lettering, and the open fields where contact marks are easy to see. The finest coins are not merely shiny. They must combine preservation, strike, luster, surface quality, and visual balance. For proof coins, collectors also examine the quality of the mirrored fields and frosted design elements, with cameo contrast adding another important dimension to the grading process. Errors and varieties create a separate path toward rarity. A coin that left the mint with a genuine striking error can become much more valuable than a normal example, but authentication is essential because damaged coins are frequently mistaken for mint errors. Mechanical doubling, die deterioration, scratches, environmental damage, plating problems, and postmint alterations can all produce unusual-looking surfaces without creating genuine numismatic rarity. The Bicentennial series has documented dramatic errors, including an extraordinary San Francisco-clad proof that was struck multiple times and off-center, producing repeated portions of the design. PCGS records that this authenticated error sold for $6,038, an amount completely disconnected from the value of an ordinary proof quarter. That is exactly why spectacular-looking coins should not automatically be assigned a high price. The error must be genuine, attributable to the minting process, and preferably supported by professional certification and an established auction record. For collectors examining a coin today, authentication and preservation should come before any assumption about value. Start by identifying the mint mark, composition, strike type, and overall condition. Then inspect the coin under good lighting without aggressively rubbing or cleaning the surfaces. Never polish a potentially valuable coin, because cleaning can permanently damage the original surface and significantly reduce collector appeal. Store better examples in inert, non-PVC holders or professionally graded holders, and keep them away from humidity, chemicals, heat, and unnecessary handling. If a coin appears unusually sharp, unusually toned, dramatically doubled, off-center, struck on an unusual planchet, or otherwise different from standard examples, professional examination becomes especially worthwhile. Certification from a respected grading service does more than place a number on the coin. It provides an independent opinion about authenticity, grade, and attribution, giving buyers and sellers a common language for the marketplace. Ultimately, the 1776-1976 Washington Bicentennial Quarter is valuable as much for what it represents as for what a particular specimen might be worth. More than 1 billion ordinary clad examples were made, ensuring that the coin itself would become a familiar part of American life, while the special silver issues, top-grade survivors, and authenticated mint errors created entirely different collecting opportunities. The market shows that an ordinary circulated quarter can remain a modest collectible, while an extraordinary certified example can cross into the thousands of dollars, and rare error or elite condition pieces can go far beyond the range most people would ever expect from a modern quarter. The key is not the dual date alone, nor simply the presence of a D or S mint mark. True collector value comes from the combination of authenticity, composition, rarity, grade, strike quality, surface preservation, variety or error status, and current demand. That is what makes this bicentennial quarter worth examining carefully. Beneath a design that millions of Americans recognize instantly, there is a complex hierarchy of coins ranging from common souvenirs of 1976 to highly competitive numismatic pieces, whose certified auction histories prove that rarity can sometimes hide in plain sight. Step 2. A 1967 Washington quarter can look almost completely ordinary. Yet this particular coin comes from one of the most turbulent and consequential periods in modern U.S. coinage. It was born during a national coin shortage, after America had made the difficult decision to move away from traditional silver in its circulating quarters, and it was produced in quantities so enormous that rarity seems almost impossible at first glance. Yet collectors have learned that mintage alone does not tell the whole story. The real mystery lies in preservation, strike quality, surface condition, production characteristics, and the unusual gap between the huge number originally made and the comparatively small number that survived in truly exceptional condition. As we follow this coin from the mint into American commerce and eventually into the collector marketplace. We will uncover the factors that separate an ordinary survivor from a genuinely important numismatic example, along with what authenticated pieces have brought at auction, and why advanced collectors are willing to compete for the very finest specimens. To understand the 1967 quarter, you have to step back into the middle of the 1960s, when the United States was experiencing a severe shortage of circulating coins. The problem was not simply that Americans were spending more money. Rising demand for small denomination coins collided with a growing tendency to save older silver pieces as their precious metal content became increasingly attractive. The Coinage Act of 1965 fundamentally changed the composition of the dime and quarter, replacing the traditional 90% silver alloy with copper-nickel-clad coinage. The quarter that entered production in 1967 therefore belonged to a new era. Its outer layers were 75% copper and 25% nickel, surrounding a pure copper center, producing a total weight of 5.67 grams and a diameter of 24.3 millimeters. The edge remained reeded, preserving the familiar visual and tactile character of the Washington quarter, even though the metal beneath the surface had changed. This transition created one of the most important dividing lines in 20th century American coin collecting. The 1967 quarter was no longer a silver quarter, but it was directly connected to the national crisis that had forced the change. The circumstances surrounding production were extraordinary. The mint was under enormous pressure to manufacture enough coins for everyday commerce, and 1967 became one of the great production years in American numismatic history. Approximately 1,524,031,848 Washington quarters were struck for circulation, an enormous figure that immediately explains why a worn 1967 quarter is not rare simply because it is nearly 6 decades old. Philadelphia accounted for 873,524,000 pieces, while Denver produced 632,767,848. San Francisco also struck 17,740,000 pieces associated with the year's special mint sets. But there is an important detail that often causes confusion. Circulating coins produced from 1965 through 1967 deliberately carried no mint marks. The Coinage Act of 1965 eliminated mint marks during the coin shortage in an effort to discourage collecting and keep newly produced coins moving into commerce. Consequently, a normal 1967 circulation quarter with no mint mark does not automatically mean it came from Philadelphia. The absence of a mint mark was part of the nationwide production policy of the period. Turn the coin over, and the design reveals how much continuity the mint wanted to preserve despite the dramatic changes taking place behind the scenes. George Washington dominates the obverse, facing left, with Liberty above his portrait and In God We Trust positioned alongside him. The portrait was created by John Flanagan and had been the defining image of the Washington quarter since its introduction in 1932. Flanagan's design was based on the celebrated bust of Washington sculpted by Jean Antlin Howdon, whose study of Washington has long been regarded as one of the most important visual records of the first U.S. president. The reverse carries the familiar American eagle with outstretched wings, surrounded by United States of America, EPLURIBUS UNUM, quarter dollar, and the 13 stars representing the original colonies. There is no commemorative artwork or unusual date arrangement on the 1967 issue. Instead, its historical importance comes from the moment in which this familiar design continued circulating, while the physical substance of American coinage was being transformed. The manufacturing process makes the condition of surviving 1967 quarters especially interesting. A circulation strike coin began as a prepared clad planchet, essentially a layered metal blank designed to provide the proper copper-nickel exterior and copper core. Under enormous pressure, A pair of dies impressed Washington's portrait and the eagle reverse into the blank, simultaneously forming the lettering, stars, rims, and other design elements. But production at this scale created challenges. The mint was trying to make billions of coins quickly, and every stage of handling could introduce contact marks, abrasions, weak details, or other surface disturbances. The coins then entered bags and distribution channels where they could strike against one another before reaching banks and businesses. That history matters today because a coin can survive for decades without significant circulation, wear, and still lose substantial collector appeal from bag marks acquired almost immediately after striking. For a modern coin like this, originality and preservation can therefore be more important than age alone. This is where the 1967 quarter begins to divide into several very different collecting categories. Most examples encountered by the public have circulated and show friction on Washington's cheek, hair, jaw, or the eagle's highest points. Those pieces are generally common. A coin that remains uncirculated enters the mint state category, but even there, the market becomes increasingly selective. MS-60 through MS-64 examples can retain the original design without circulation, where yet display numerous marks or disturbances. MS-65 represents a much stronger collector-quality coin, while MS-66 requires substantially cleaner surfaces and stronger overall eye appeal. MS-67 is where the competition becomes serious, because the combination of excellent preservation, attractive luster, minimal contact marks, and strong strike becomes considerably harder to find. PCGS records the current top certified regular strike grade at MS-68, and its population and auction information show just how dramatic the premium can become at that level. A certified MS-67 example has appeared at auction for $80, while an MS-68 reached $8,812.50 in a heritage auction sale. That enormous gap is not a contradiction. It is the market demonstrating how sharply collectors distinguish between merely uncirculated and truly exceptional. The absence of annual uncirculated mint sets during this period adds another layer to the story. The mint had stopped producing traditional proof sets after 1964 because production resources were needed to fight the coin shortage, and special mint sets were introduced instead. In 1967, approximately 1.8 million quarters were included in these special sets, and these pieces can be mistaken for ordinary circulation strikes if examined casually. Their surfaces and manufacture were different, with specially prepared dies and planchets producing coins that often exhibit more reflective or carefully defined surfaces than typical business strikes. Modern grading services classify these separately as special strikes, or SB coins, and some display cameo or deep cameo contrast. The distinction can be crucial. A 1967 quarter with unusually reflective fields should not automatically be called a proof, because true proof sets were not produced that year. A properly identified SMS specimen can, however, occupy its own collector market, and high-grade examples can command hundreds or even several $1,000s depending on grade and contrast. One authenticated SB68 Deep Cameo example has recorded a $4,465 auction result, illustrating why correct attribution matters. The special mint set coins also open the door to varieties that serious specialists actively pursue. Professional variety references recognize 1967 SMS double die obverse and double die reverse varieties, including FS101 and FS801 designations, as well as cameo and deep cameo versions. These are not simply coins with random-looking doubling caused by damage or mechanical distortion. A legitimate double die originates from a die-making process in which a design element is impressed into the die more than once in different positions, creating recognizable, attributable doubling on the finished coins. That distinction is essential because post-mint damage is extremely common, and can create convincing-looking distortions. A collector should therefore avoid assigning a premium to unusual lettering or apparent doubling, without comparing it against established references or submitting the coin to a qualified specialist. The same principle applies to suspected off-center strikes, clipped planchets, broad strikes, die breaks, and other mint errors. The appearance may be interesting, but only a properly authenticated error should be treated as a scarce numismatic variety. Authentication becomes even more important because the 1967 quarter exists in several physical and market categories that can easily be confused. A collector examining an ordinary piece should first verify the date, diameter, weight, edge, and copper-nickel clad construction. Because there is no mint mark on normal 1967 circulation strikes, a missing letter is not evidence of a missing mint mark variety. Be cautious when a seller describes a coin as a rare 1967D or 1967P circulation quarter, because the normal circulating issue does not carry those mint marks. Surface color can also be misleading. Fresh copper-nickel-clad coins may appear bright and silvery, while environmental exposure can produce gray, golden, brown, or other natural toning. Artificially altered surfaces, polishing, harsh cleaning, or chemical treatments can destroy the original texture and reduce desirability, even when the underlying coin is technically uncirculated. The safest approach for a potentially valuable piece is to leave the surface untouched, avoid abrasive cleaning, and seek examination from a respected grading service or experienced numismatist. Preservation is especially important for a coin whose greatest value comes from the upper reaches of the grading scale. A potentially high-grade 1967 quarter should be handled only by its edges, preferably while wearing clean gloves or after thoroughly washing and drying the hands, and it should never be rubbed to improve its appearance. Storage in an inert holder that does not contain damaging PVC is preferable to loose storage in envelopes, pockets, or containers where the coin can slide against other metal. Stable temperature and low humidity help protect the copper-nickel surfaces from environmental damage, while avoiding unnecessary exposure to chemicals, moisture, and direct handling preserves the original luster. Collectors should also remember that grading is not determined by brightness alone. A naturally lustrous coin with scattered marks may grade lower than expected, while a beautifully preserved coin with subdued but original surfaces can be much more desirable. Color, toning, strike, luster, contact marks, hairline abrasions, and overall eye appeal all interact within the grading process. And that brings the 1967 Washington quarter back to the question that makes this coin so fascinating. How can a piece produced in quantities exceeding 1.5 billion become an object of serious competition? The answer is that rarity exists at different levels. The ordinary 1967 quarter is common, but the finest survivors are not. PCGS estimates a large surviving population across all grades, yet the number of coins reaching the highest certified levels becomes dramatically smaller. The auction record of $8,812.50 for an MS-68 regular strike demonstrates the extreme upper boundary of the market, while lower-grade certified pieces have sold for much more modest amounts, including an MS-66 example recorded at $27 and an MS-67 example at $200. Those figures show why assigning a single value to every 1967 quarter is misleading. A circulated example may be worth little beyond its face value. An attractive uncirculated coin can have a meaningful premium. A superb certified business strike can become a competitive rarity, and an elite SMS variety or high-contrast specimen can move into an entirely different category. The 1967 Washington quarter, therefore, tells a story larger than its denomination. It captures the nation's struggle with a coin shortage, the end of traditional silver circulation, the beginning of the clad era, and the transformation of ordinary pocket change into a specialized field of modern numismatics. Nearly 60 years later, the date remains common, but the finest surviving examples demonstrate a lesson collectors repeatedly encounter. When millions of coins were made, true rarity may not be found in the date itself, but in the tiny fraction that survived with extraordinary quality, legitimate variety attribution, original surfaces, and the kind of eye appeal that makes advanced collectors stop and look twice. Step 3. There is something deceptively ordinary about a 1977 Washington quarter. Pull one from a box of old coins, and it can look like nothing more than another familiar piece of American pocket change. Yet experienced collectors know that the date deserves a much closer examination. The reason is not that every 1977 quarter is rare, far from it, but that this issue sits at an intriguing point in the modern Washington quarter series, where enormous production numbers, changing minting practices, exceptional condition survivors, and dramatic mint errors can create completely different levels of collector interest. The first clues are hiding in places most people overlook: the tiny mint mark, the quality of Washington's portrait, the sharpness of the eagle's feathers, the texture of the fields, and even the edge of the coin. As we investigate this quarter piece by piece, the ordinary examples will separate themselves from the unusual ones, and later we will examine authenticated auction results that show exactly how condition, rarity, certification, and genuine mint-made abnormalities can transform the collecting story of a 1977 quarter. The year itself provides important context. In 1977, the United States was moving through a period of economic uncertainty, with inflation becoming a major concern, and the country adjusting to the energy crisis and the economic pressures that had followed it. Jimmy Carter had just taken office as president, and American commerce continued to depend heavily on coins for everyday transactions. The Washington quarter was already deeply established in American life, having served since 1932, but by this point the silver era was long over. The Coinage Act of 1965 had replaced the traditional 90% silver quarter with copper-nickel-clad coinage, and the 1977 issue continued that composition. The standard quarter weighed 5.67 grams, measured 24.3 millimeters in diameter, and had a reeded edge. Its outer layers consisted of an alloy containing 75% copper and 25% nickel, bonded to a pure copper core. That construction is important when examining an old quarter, because the exposed edge can reveal the copper center between the pale outer layers, immediately distinguishing a normal-clad coin from certain unusual off-metal errors. Now examine the date and the mint mark, because this is where our investigation begins to narrow. Philadelphia produced 468,556,000 regular 1977 quarters, and those coins carry no mint mark. Denver struck 256,524,978 regular quarters, identified by the small d beneath the wreath on the reverse. San Francisco produced proof examples for collectors rather than ordinary circulation pieces, with 3,251,152 copper-nickel-clad proofs recorded for the year. That means the mint mark is not a decorative detail. It establishes which facility produced the coin and can materially affect its place in a collection. A no-mint mark 1977 quarter is a Philadelphia circulation issue, while a D-marked example came from Denver. The S-marked proof is a separate collecting category with different manufacturing characteristics. Experienced collectors, therefore, do not begin by guessing a value from the date alone. They identify the exact issue first, then consider whether the coin was circulated, struck for collectors, affected by an error, or preserved at an unusually high level. The designs themselves reveal another layer of history. On the obverse, George Washington faces left, with liberty above his portrait and In God We Trust beside him. The design is credited to John Flanagan and is ultimately based on the celebrated bust of Washington created by G. Nantlin Howdon. On the reverse, an American eagle spreads its wings above a bundle of arrows, with an olive branch beneath and 13 stars surrounding the composition. The arrows symbolize military strength, while the olive branch traditionally represents peace, creating a deliberate balance between national defense and peaceful intentions. United States of America surrounds the upper portion. EPLURIBUSUNUM appears above the eagle, and quarter dollar identifies the denomination. Nothing about the artwork screams rarity, and that is precisely why careful examination matters. A collector looking for a superior 1977 specimen studies Washington's cheek and jaw, the hair detail, the lettering, the open fields, the eagle's breast and wing feathers, and the areas most likely to show contact marks. A coin can have brilliant surfaces while still lacking the strike or preservation necessary for a premium grade. To understand why some survivors are much more desirable, imagine the journey of a newly struck quarter. The mint began with copper-nickel-clad strip stock. Prepared planchets were fed into high-speed coining presses, and enormous pressure transferred the obverse and reverse designs into the metal. Once struck, coins were handled in bulk, transported, bagged, rolled, distributed to financial institutions, and eventually released into the public. At every stage, surfaces could collide with other coins. This is one reason modern coins can be difficult at the very highest grades even when millions were made. A quarter does not have to circulate for years to acquire damage. Contact marks can occur before it ever reaches a customer's pocket. Luster is another important clue. Original mint luster comes from the microscopic flow of metal across the die during striking, creating the characteristic cartwheel effect when the coin is tilted under light. A bright surface, however, is not automatically evidence of originality. Cleaning, polishing, artificial treatments, and harsh chemicals can create brightness, while destroying the natural surface that advanced collectors want to preserve. That distinction leads directly into professional grading. A circulated 1977 quarter can range from heavily worn examples with flattened details to lightly circulated pieces retaining much of the original design. Once circulation wear disappears, the coin can qualify for a mint state grade, but MS-60 is only the beginning of that scale. MS-63 and MS-64 coins can remain attractive while displaying noticeable contact marks or other distractions. At MS-65, the overall quality becomes much more competitive, while MS-66 demands cleaner surfaces, stronger eye appeal, and better preservation. The upper levels are dramatically more difficult. PCGS records a population of only a small number of regular Philadelphia pieces at MS-67 plus and shows an auction record of $2,550 for an authenticated MS-67 plus example. That result is a perfect demonstration of why the date itself cannot be used as a price tag. A normal 1977 quarter is common, while an exceptionally preserved certified coin can become scarce enough for specialists to compete aggressively. The Denver issue follows the same principle, but has its own population and market history. A 1977 D quarter is common in circulated grades, and even many uncirculated examples are obtainable without extraordinary expense. Yet the number of coins surviving at the highest certified grades falls sharply. PCGS records an MS-67 auction result of $460, while a Stax Bowers sale produced a $312 result for another certified MS-67. These numbers are dramatically different from the value of an ordinary circulated quarter and show why grade must always be stated alongside a market figure. A collector who sees a 1977 D quarter advertised for hundreds of dollars should immediately ask, what grade is it? Which grading service certified it? Is the coin genuinely uncirculated? Are the surfaces original? How strong is the strike? How many comparable pieces exist at that grade? A coin's color can also matter aesthetically. Natural silver gray, golden, champagne, or light peripheral toning can be attractive, While dark, unnatural, or chemically altered coloration may hurt desirability, there is no universal premium simply for being toned. Originality and visual quality are what matter, but the investigation becomes far more interesting when the coin is no longer a normal coin. Genuine 1977 mint errors are documented, and some are considerably more important than ordinary condition rarities. One confirmed example was struck on a Lincoln cent planchet, producing a quarter design on a planchet dramatically smaller and lighter than the correct quarter blank. A certified NGC MS-63 red and brown 1977 D quarter, struck on a cent planchet, weighed only 3.07 grams, and sold for $1,150 at Heritage Auctions in 2008. Another remarkable 1977 D quarter was struck on a 40% silver planchet, an unusual transitional error connected to the silver-clad bicentennial production that had preceded the regular 1977 coinage. Heritage recorded that authenticated example, graded NGC details XF, because it had been improperly cleaned, at $4,935 in 2016. These are precisely the kinds of records that must be handled responsibly. They do not establish that an ordinary 1977 quarter is worth thousands of dollars. They establish that a genuinely rare, authenticated wrong planchet error can enter an entirely different market. That makes authentication one of the most important parts of the entire investigation. A suspiciously light quarter should not automatically be called a cent planchet error, and a pale-looking coin should not automatically be called silver. Weight is a useful first screening tool, but professional analysis may also require precise measurements, edge examination, metal testing, die diagnostics, and comparison with known examples. The edge of a normal clad quarter reveals its copper core, while a silver-clad wrong planchet example can lack that familiar copper band. Collectors should also be cautious with alleged doubled dies, filled mint marks, machine doubling, scratches, dents, and post-mint alterations. A genuine die variety must correspond to a documented die characteristic rather than a random disturbance created after the coin left the mint. Likewise, an error should make mechanical sense within the striking process. Professional certification from a recognized grading service can provide a much stronger foundation than an online seller's description. If a coin appears dramatically off-center, broad-struck, struck on the wrong planchet, or otherwise unlike a normal quarter, preserving it exactly as found is far safer than cleaning or altering it before examination. For collectors who discover an interesting 1977 quarter today, preservation should begin with restraint. Do not polish it, scrape the surfaces, rub away discoloration, or use household chemicals to make the metal appear brighter. Even a coin with attractive natural luster can be permanently damaged by cleaning, and a potentially valuable error becomes far harder to evaluate once its surfaces have been altered. Use an inert holder designed for long-term coin storage. Avoid PVC-containing plastics. Keep the coin away from moisture and temperature extremes, and handle it by the edges. The most important lesson from the auction records is that rarity is not one-dimensional. A regular 1977 quarter can be common, while a top-grade survivor is scarce. A normal Denver issue can be inexpensive, while a certified MS-67 example has brought hundreds, and an authenticated wrong planchet error can cross into the $1,000 range, or, in the case of the remarkable silver planchet example, nearly $5,000. The long-term importance of the 1977 Washington quarter, therefore, lies in this contrast. It represents an ordinary chapter of American commerce, produced in vast numbers during a changing economic era. Yet within that enormous population are rare intersections of exceptional preservation and genuine mint mistakes. Those are the coins experienced collectors hunt for, not because every 1977 quarter is a hidden fortune, but because careful observation can reveal the difference between a common survivor and a documented piece of the mint's own production history.